Hello, good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, the 13th of October. Today we're going to finish this unit in AP Euro on England and France developed governments. And spoiler alert, our next test will be Friday, October the, let's see, 14th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th. Friday, October the 16th. Okay? Friday, October the 16th. I'll, of course, put other types of notifications on there. But yes, we are at the end of this unit and time to move on to another unit. So, yes. I hope that I did a better job yesterday, or rather last Thursday, of talking about this idea of mercantilism, the economics of mercantilism. Very, very important. That little film that I sent you, the little YouTube video, I thought it was pretty succinct. I mean, the elements of, once again, mercantilism are one, large quantities, gold and silver bullion. 2, to have a positive balance of trade. That means you export more products you import. In other words, your country makes money. 3, colonies serve as both a source of raw materials for the MC, means mother country, and as a market for the MC. I did not intend to do that. Let's go back here and figure 4. The colony is not to compete with the MC in any. I hate that light. But you know what? You can see me anyway, right? I just can't see it there. In any form economically. Okay. Yes. That's a good place to stop. So let's get down to business, shall we? And nope, that's not it. That's not it. Ah, here's one thing. Yes, This is a nice little cartoon, a nice diagram that kind of helps you understand that. So you see that? Take a screenshot of that. So here's the mother country sitting over here, and the mother country is being waited on by the colonies. Yes? Gold and silver, foodstuffs, raw materials. To be honest, the British did this to the Irish, and the Spanish did this to Central and South America. The British thought they could do that to the 13 colonies of the United States, and that's what caused the American Revolution. And I'll talk about this later, but the British demanded a certain price for manufactured goods sent from Britain to the colonies, and yet the British would only pay a certain level of price for things that the colonies produced, such as tobacco, cotton, et cetera, et cetera. George Washington, that was one of the reasons why George Washington was a farmer. And George Washington, his farm wasn't making any money because the British government would not let them make money. George Washington would ship tobacco to England, which was in great demand, should have brought a high price. But that price was controlled by the British government. Okay, what are we at here? That's not it. Make that bigger. This is an example of the triangular trade. Of course, begins here. Well, it doesn't begin here. It begins here in Europe, and with the Europeans producing actually gunpowder, shot and shell goes to Africa. From Africa, slaves go here, and over here, all sorts of raw materials, tobacco, molasses for making rum, cotton, indigo, potatoes, not potatoes, it didn't ship well, but corn, and then that got shipped over. And so, yes, back to the matter hand, mercantilism, middle passage, that's not for you, that's not for you, and that's for you. All right, let us begin, shall we? Or rather, end. We are close to the end. So Louis XIV, the absolute prototype for what an absolute monarch should look like or be like, got France involved in many wars that were costly in terms of men and money. The first was the War of Devolution. For the longest time, I did not know what devolution meant. The only thing Mr. Arlinghouse can attest to, Devo, that's some band that said, whip it good. Anyway, but the War of Devolution occurred because Maria Therese was a Spanish princess. She had married Louis XIV. It was one of those political marriages that the royal families of Europe got into. In fact, after a few hundred years, all of the royal families of Europe, in fact, by World War I, all the royal families of Europe were all first cousins. And I mean first cousins. And they continue to marry. And it is why in European history you see a lot of undesirable traits keep resurfacing. Like, for one thing, that Habsburg chin, that shovel thing. Hemophilia was also a result of that. And also certain types of mental illnesses began to show up, particularly in the Russian royal family. But anyway, Maria Therese, the Spanish princess, had married Louis, and Louis thought that part of the deal, because it was a deal, marrying her was a deal. No, forget romance, it was a deal. Thought that when the King of Spain died, that he would claim a dowry. Please tell me you know what a dowry is. A dowry is, once again, a gift that is given to the groom for marrying the bride. And Louis XIV thought he would receive a dowry of 500,000 crowns. That's a whole lot of gold. Do I know what a crown is? No, I do not. I think it was a weight in gold. That was never met. So when Philip IV of Spain died, Louis claimed some Spanish holdings, basically in what is now Belgium and Luxembourg, Flanders and Brabant, said that that had devolved to his wife, and if it was his wife, property, it belonged to him. So, however, oh, look at that term, in order to maintain the balance of power. Ooh, balance of power. Balance of power, and that's, mercantilism is one thing, balance of power is another that you learn in this unit, and there'll be questions about both of them, and they're really important. Balance of power is just so important. And it's hard to understand. It's a simple concept. And the easiest way to explain it is like this. Consider balance of power like a game. You like that, Mr. Arlinghouse? I know that makes you laugh. Balance of power in European politics is like a game that children would play. Now, the object of any game is what? To have fun. Right? I mean, children play games to have fun. If they are not having fun, then it defeats the object of playing the game. So let's pretend that I and used to in class, I could always pick out somebody, but since you're all sitting at home. But let's pretend that I and a 5-year-old child. There we go. We'll just say a 5-year-old child. I don't have a grandson. I have a granddaughter, and she's only less than a year old, so that wouldn't work. But a 5-year-old child went outside to play. Do not call the police. Went outside to play in the playground. In the playground, there are things that we can play with. One of those things is a teeter-totter. Right? And so 5-year-old child gets on one end of the teeter-totter. I get on the other end of the teeter-totter. Now here's your question, Mr. Arlinghouse. Are we having fun? Use your imagination. Imagine me on one end of the seesaw, 5-year-old, one of your kids, Mr. Arlinghouse, on the other end. The child you have is closest to 5-year-old. Are we having fun? I'll give you a minute to think about that. Teeter-totter looks like this. Are we having fun? Answer, no. So, what can we do to have fun? Well, one thing, Mr. Arlinghouse, who has 1 or 2 children, actually I know he has a couple, could send out 3 or 4 of his other children. They would then sit on the other end of the seesaw for me, and teeter-totter goes, and then we can do this. Up, down, up, down. And you know what? We're having fun. The balance of power is like that. Now, the object of the balance of power, and now you're writing, the object of the balance of power is to ensure that no one country in Europe becomes too powerful. Like me sitting on the teeter-totter with Mr. Arlinghouse's 5-year-old child. And if that occurs, then the other nations of Europe, like Mr. Arlinghouse's other children, clamber on to the teeter-totter on the seesaw on the other end until it balances out. And so that's what would happen. In balance of power, and a lot of the wars of the 18th and 19th centuries could be defined as BOP, balance of power wars. In fact, that's a lot of times in the future, you'll just see me write BOP, BOP. Remember Mr. Tiemann, Mr. Arlinghouse, BOP? That ever happened to you? Balance of power. And during the 18th and 19th century, you'll actually see countries get into a war for no other reason than to maintain the balance of power. Then the idea, if that one country becomes too powerful, it threatens us all. Well, for example, let's pretend that you, and it could be any of you, and 9 of your friends decide you want to play basketball. And so you go outside and you play basketball. First thing you do is you divide up teams. You get into 2 groups of 5, you play basketball. And the problem is that after 10 minutes of the game, the score is 78-2. Question again, are you having fun? Now you might think, well, the ones who score 78 are not really. Nobody, if the object of the game is to have fun and the score is 78-2, you're like, this is boring. So how would you fix that game? How would you fix that game? Mr. Briggs, how would you fix that game? How would you make it to where you had fun? I hope that you are saying, well, you'd stop the game, re-choose sides, and then play again, with the idea of equaling the power of each. Yeah, okay. And so in that way, you would have fun. And if you understand that, you understand the balance of power is not only about deterring a threat, but it's also about defeating a country that became too strong. And that's what happens. So in order to maintain the balance of power, France had become this juggernaut, and France was threatening to take over more and more of Europe. So in order to maintain the balance of power, in order to keep France from becoming too powerful, England, Sweden, and the United Province of Holland formed the Triple Alliance. And this persuaded Louis to agree to a peace treaty called the Peace of Aix-la-Chapelle, 1668. The next major war was the War of the Invasion of the Netherlands, which is exactly what the war was about. Same story, different verse. The Triple Alliance fell apart. In other words, after the threat of Louis XIV was over with, the Triple Alliance had nothing to unite them together, no threat, and so they did. They split up. And when the Triple Alliance fell apart, that encouraged Louis XIV to invade the Netherlands for the purpose of acquiring more territory. Louis XIV felt that the French border, and look at a map of France if you have one, that the French border should go all the way to the Rhine River. Now, the border between France and Germany today is the Rhine River, but the Rhine River deviates and goes up through the Netherlands, and that's the point of the matter. France does not today own. My hands hurt. Ow. France does not own Europe all the way to the Rhine River, and that was Louis XIV's objective. He thought France should own everything all the way to the Rhine River, all the way to the North Sea. That's what he thought. William of Orange, the ruler of the Netherlands, was able to galvanize, I like big words, harden Dutch resistance to the French, and with the Holy Roman Empire, who was still something of a country, Spain, Lorraine, which is a region in Germany, and Brandenburg were able to throw back what was the advances of the Christian Turk. I've seen that term on somebody's test somewhere. I don't recall when. Perhaps it's Friday's test. Louis XIV, the term Christian Turk is a reference to the fact that the Ottoman Turks, the Ottoman Empire, was once very, very aggressive and still was considered a threat in Europe. And so they call Louis XIV the Christian Turk, as it says there, who seemed to threaten all of Western Europe. The Peace of Nijmegen, signed in 1678, put the war at end. And while there were a few boundary shifts, the only clear winner was the Dutch Republic. The Dutch Republic was left unmolested. Okay. There we go. Come on, Horton. Right there. All right. It was said that the worst political blunder of Louis XIV was the revocation, that means he did away with it, of the Edict of Nantes. Now, we actually studied the Edict of Nantes just in the last chapter. The Edict of Nantes, a document that allowed French Catholics and French Huguenots to live in the same country. It gave Huguenots some form of, freedom in France. Louis XIV hated that document because Louis XIV was an ardent Roman Catholic. At this time, out of a population of about 20 million people in France, 1.75, in other words, about 10% of the population of France were actively Huguenots, 10%. But their numbers were declining. The French Catholic Church had long advocated the persecution of Huguenots as both pious. The word pious means to do right. And the French Catholic Church said persecuting Huguenots is a pious thing to do. Yeah, their idea of piety has changed somewhat. And patriotic. A good Roman Catholic Frenchman will hate Huguenots and will give them all sorts of trouble. Louis then revoked the Edict of Nantes, struck it down as a law in October of 1685. Protestant ministers, Huguenot ministers, were exiled from France. Many of them, by the way, those Huguenots left and went to the North America. Many settled, interestingly enough, many of them settled in South Carolina. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Others settled in French Canada. But yeah, Protestant, non-converting laity, non-converting. That means they refuse to convert to Roman Catholicism. Laity means what? Now, we said lay people. What's a lay person? A lay person is a religious person who is not ordained. He's not a priest. But non-converting laity were forced to be galley slaves. You say, galley slaves? What does that mean? It meant they rowed. They were chained to the bottom of a boat and they rowed. Ferries, and that's what they did. And it's a very backbreaking existence, and you're subject to the elements, and it's not uncommon to die. So yeah, Protestant children were ceremonially baptized into the Roman Catholic Church by a Catholic priest. The revocation of the Edict of Nantes. I did not know. Prompted 250,000 French people to leave France outright. 250,000. That's quite a number. It also took some of the most industrious taxpayers out of France. See, Louis XIV really shot himself in the foot because many of these Huguenots, remember, Huguenots are Calvinists, and Huguenots or Calvinists have this idea that making money and being industrious and working hard, remember, it's called the Protestant work ethic. The Protestant work ethic. They thought that that was a pious act of God. And people who make lots of money can be taxed. And Louis XIV kicking these people out of France, a tremendous amount of tax base went with them. So Louis XIV was cutting off his own nose to spite his face. It also took some of the most industrious taxpayers out of France. Oh, I said that before, I'm sorry. However, part 3. Louis always considered this a pious act. In other words, Louis XIV, if you're ever asked, was Louis XIV a politique? Answer, no. Louis XIV did what the Catholic Church told him. He got rid of the Jansenists, and now he got rid of the Huguenots. He did what he was told by the Roman Catholic Church. Louis XIV, later wars got France more and more in debt. And yeah, that was it. France was the richest country in Europe, had the strongest army in Europe, had the largest population in Western Europe, and had all the advantages. And Louis XIV, because he was so aggressive, so overreaching, and the man spent money like it was water, got France into heavy debt. Remember again that while Louis XIV is doing all these things, that the Palace of Versailles, his little cottage for him and 10,000 of his closest friends, and 10,000 is not an exaggeration, 10,000 of his buddies, members of the nobility, the maintenance of that little house, I keep saying little, it's humongous. The maintenance of that house cost 60%. 60%. How can this? Huh? 60% of the treasury. 60% of the treasury went to just keeping the house running, not building it, just keeping it running. And then, he went to war with everybody. Yeah, Louis XIV went to war with everybody. 4 major wars. This is number 3, the War of the League of Augsburg. The War of the League of Augsburg was caused by, once again, French expansion into Strasbourg, which today is a part of France, and into Germany, and caused the League of Augsburg, created in 1689, to include England, Spain, Sweden, the United Province of Holland. United Provinces means the United Provinces of Holland. Let me write that. Or the Netherlands. And the electorates of Bavaria, Saxony, and the Palatinate, which are parts of what is now Germany. And once again, why did all these countries jump in? Why did England jump in? I mean, England was not involved. England sat across the English Channel because France was upsetting the balance of power. Called the 9 Years' War, or Prince William's War in North America, in reference to one of the English princes over the North America, over the North American colonies. It was a very destructive war. The Peace of Ryswick was a triumph for William III of the Netherlands. And then you have the big one, the War of Spanish Succession. This is the big one, the War of Spanish Succession, the last of the 4 wars. And the War of Spanish Succession is about exactly what the name says it's about. It's about who would be the next king of Spain. By the way, not to confuse you, but it's going to, but later on there will be a War of Austrian Succession. But let's deal with this, shall we? The King of Spain, Charles II, had died. Charles II's closest male relative just also happened to be the grandson of Louis XIV, a guy named Philip. Philip wanted the throne of Spain. The rest of Europe feared that if the grandson of Louis XIV becomes King of Spain and the grandfather, Louis XIV himself, is King of France, it will create this giant mega country of frame. Well, they wouldn't call it that, but can you imagine? Spain still was hauling silver over from the New World by the boatload. And Louis XIV had all these men to put in an army. And Spain still had something of a navy. Can you imagine the juggernaut of power a united Spain and France would be? And so this is what kicks it off. Louis sent French troops into Flanders, and no, this is not Homer Simpson's neighbor. Flanders it's actually today it's Belgium, part of Belgium. Flanders to claim that area for France. Then the new Grand Alliance, they call themselves. England, do you have to remember all the names of the countries in here? No, not really, except for a matching question. One matching question, League of Augsburg. I don't know, that might pop up. But you will never be asked to spit them out. So, the Grand Alliance, England, Holland, the Holy Roman Empire, tried to oppose Louis and make Flanders a neutral barrier between France and Holland. And France said, no, we ain't buying that, and went to war. Unfinanced, because Louis XIV had spent all his money, ill-equipped. England had bayonets and flintlock rifles. Superior tactics, thanks to a guy named John Churchill, and yes, a descendant of, yeah. France finally signed an armistice with England that allowed, okay, so let's put in the terms of the Treaty of Utrecht. Shall we? Treaty of Utrecht? Which ends the war. Okay. Okay, 1. France and Spain not united. 2. Philip will be the king of Spain. 3. England will receive an Asiento. How interesting. I don't have Asiento. Do this. Yes, Asiento. And you say, Mr. Horton, what is the Asiento? I say, you'll have to look on your test to find out. Technically, the Asiento is the English were given the right for 20 years after that to sell slaves, African slaves, to the Spanish colonies. That seems very, very specific. But what it should show you is the value of the slave trade. It was so lucrative. I mean, so much money to be made in human beings. I mean, that's horrible, but it's true. There was tons of money to be made in the sale of human beings. Lots of people didn't respect it, but other people took the money and ran. So England will receive an Asiento. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, Gibraltar. Please tell me, after that discussion we had, particularly my A people, that you know what Gibraltar is. The ones I had in class yesterday, I showed you Gibraltar. England receives this, the Treaty of Utrecht of 1715, and holds on to it to this very day. Ah! Stupid! Can you believe that? To this very day. I mean, actually, and I've never been there. I want to go this summer. I want to go to Gibraltar this summer. Not only, of course, because of its strategic importance. Gibraltar, what it is a giant outcropping of rock. But that outcropping of rock is at the very southern tip of Spain, and it guards the entrance from the Atlantic Ocean into the Mediterranean Sea. I shouldn't have to point this out to you, but yes. And it's this giant outcropping of rock that goes from the ocean beach straight up, hundreds of feet into the air, hundreds of feet. If you stand on top of it, you can look across and you can see Africa. And the British took this and honeycombed it with gun emplacements, cannon emplacements. Today, of course, it's a tourist destination. Today, if you're British, it's one of the places in the British Empire, what remains of the British Empire, that you can still go and get a suntan.
Mr. Schaefer, can you please call your office? Mr. Schaefer, please call your office. Thanks.
Anyway, back to the matter at hand. And so the British go there, and it's so tiny that jets they have to stop traffic, road traffic. They have to stop road traffic for the jets to land, bringing these British tourists. But anyway, you go up on this outcropping of rock, and as a tourist, and the place is populated with monkeys. I'm not lying, monkeys. And these monkeys are thieves. I mean, you have to be really careful because and they're very clever. Like, for example, one of them, you'll be wearing sunglasses, one of them will snatch your glasses while the other picks your pocket. Not lying. And if you have some fruit, you better give it to them, because and they'll smell it too. If it's in your bag, they'll smell it. But yeah, they bite. One other thing they do, raging alcoholics. Not lying. I mean, people will be down the beach, and these monkeys also hang around on the beach, and they've developed a taste for alcohol. Oh yeah, and they get drunk as a monkey, I suppose. Yeah, quite entertaining. But yeah, the British received Gibraltar. Spain actually tried to take it back several times after this. But yeah. So Spain was ruined as a world power after this because they actually tried to fight and help the French. England would now own the 18th century, like France had owned the 17th century, and Spain would own the 16th century. All right. Louis had left a mixed legacy in France. Louis was an efficient king. He was not a good king. That means Louis, he was efficient. He did what he wanted to do. He wanted to establish a strong government. He did that. He was able to establish the king as the ruler of all things in France. He did that. However, the way he did it, his successors, Louis XV, Louis XVI, will both try to do that as well. And it will result within less than 100 years the French Revolution. Yeah. And the beheading of Louis XVI, his direct descendant. But we'll get to that a little later on. The wars of Louis XIV had drained French manpower and finances. In fact, Louis XIV, on his deathbed, had said, perhaps, and he died of venereal disease, by the way, had said, perhaps I have been too fond of war. Louis's policies would later make it difficult to develop effective institutions of representation and self-government, because all the governing bodies, all the governing peoples of France lived in the Palace of Versailles. And they lived like kings and had all their needs taken care of. And all they cared about was partying and drinking and all these sorts of things. And so, as it says there, the aristocracy became lazy and useless with the years of the Versailles court. Louis's rule, while absolute, however, was not so totalitarian, as harsh as the rule of the later dictatorships of the 19th and 20th centuries, such as the Russian czars of the 19th century, such as, of course, Benito Mussolini, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, etc., 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 of the 20th century. And that ends us for that chapter. Now, yes, we are going to have a test Friday, the 16th. Yeah, the 16th of October. Yeah, and that's where I will leave it. So, hasta la vista, baby.